Hey there guys, this is Obsidian Chill. Got another video for you today. And each time there's a bonus artifact XP week, which is presently going on from March 28th to the 30th, I try to release one of these videos to kind of give you guys guidance and opinions in terms of what artifacts you should focus on to level. Either increasing levels from, like, say, if it's already at 140, 160, getting into 200, or what artifacts you should start from scratch and level up to take this opportunity. So I know I've done this kind of in spreadsheet format in the past, but you guys have been looking at way too many of those recently, so let's do some visual aids this time. So for DPS in general, for precision DPS is quite simple. It's going to be the standard 4. You're not really going outside of those 4 artifacts: Transformation Card, Strategist Card, Gemini, and Grim. You may get like Dead King Scepter, Philosopher's Stone if you want to artifact swap to those like Spy Drops or Orbitals, or DPS trinkets, etc. But for mainly for those prison DPS, you should have those 4 artifacts. For Might DPS, it does expand the category a bit. You still want to have those 4 artifacts as Might DPS. Now, Grim is slightly on the outside now, looking in. Quizlet is the better option in terms of having over Grim. In terms of like the at 200, you get the supercharge regen. You get the pretty much the only time Quizlet is not going to be effective is if you're not using a 5,000 supercharge, or if say if you're not using 5,000. Like if you're continually using like 2,500s to proc Gemini, or you're waiting to proc like a 10k, Quizlet may not be as beneficial then. But Quizlet's very beneficial for if you're using a 5,000 supercharge, just how much you're going to get from the Mega Blast attacks. And there's some outliers where Grim is handy for that 10% PI. For single target for Might, Heat Vision is still primary component to like 90% of rotation, so you want Soul Amplifier. Doesn't necessarily have to be a 200. 200 just gives you that tactical mod for interrupts. Drawing a blank quickly what that mod's called. But either way, yeah, all it does is just saves you from interrupts, which I mean it is handy on Heat Vision, but it's not necessarily required for raids because you're not going to be getting lunged anyway. But once again, it's handy. Linera's Amulet, if you want to max Might DPS rotations, and while it is kind of like a high-risk playstyle, that's still the best option to get the highest Might you can. Dead King Scepter, I'll be covering that in a separate video, but that is a very beneficial artifact for DPS in general. And Source Shard, that's for like a pet component. So if you're like a pet DPS, then you're going to want Quizlet, Grim, and Source Shard right now, these 3. So taking a look at Controller. Controllers really stayed the same for quite some time. If you want a buff Controller, you're going to have Amulet of Rao, Claw, and either Tetra, Cog, or both. Amulet of Rao kind of is interchangeable, so basically it's going to be Rao, Parasite Power Harness, and Scrap the Soul Cloak for Power Controller. So that's really stayed the same for quite some time, since Claw basically came out. But you also saw my supercharged video, my previous video uploaded, so the effects that having a buff controller can have on your damage in terms of supercharge. So it is quite beneficial to be running a buff controller. Now for healer, once again, kind of a set rotation: Transformation Card, Page of Destiny, Purple Healing Ray, and Eye of the Gemini. That's what you're going to see. There's no artifact combination that's going to out heal these 4 artifacts as you as a player. It doesn't matter what power set you are. These are going to be the ones that are going to generate either like a pure healing build or Gemini spam build, etc. It's basically, I mean, you could argue like Scrap the Soul Cloak for like a Gemini spam build, but even then, you're still perfectly fine off. So for tank, same thing. Tank, there is the main 4: Manacles of Force, Mystic Symbol of the Seven, Gemini, and Everyman Prototype. Yeah, that's your pretty much go-to for the 4. Now there are some power sets, like say for example like Ice, you can go like Circe's Mask instead of Prototype, or like the Nuclearian artifact, or there's Digital Refractor. So there are some substitutes, but if you have these 4 artifacts as a tank, you're covered for pretty much 99% of situations. So bringing into artifacts to consider leveling, Pied Piper's Flute is very good for DPS. It's only going to be an art swap artifact, but it is very powerful unless you're using a buff supercharge. Like say if you're using like Circuit Breaker, if you're going to be using like New Venom Boost, it's not going to proc on that because it's just it doesn't have a damage component. So you have to be mindful of what supercharge you use. Scrap the Soul Cloak, once again, it's kind of interchangeable to a bunch of different rotations in terms of your DPS, and using like Electric or Rage, and you want to focus on your Supercharge, even like Earth, being able to use Unstoppable as a Super generator. You've got healers using it, controllers using it for power healing, or for for Gemini Span builds. So Scrap the Soul Cloak is very interchangeable along a lot of rotations. And then Philosopher's Stone just for the supply drop buff, which is still very handy for art swaps. Now controller, there's really nothing to consider leveling. I'll get to the next page in terms of like if you're asking about like Grimbors or Bob Comlink or Rings of the Azar, stuff like that. I'll cover that on the next slide. But really, all those fall outside of the meta. For healer, I did put the Clarion here. The Clarion does present the best opportunity we've had in a while in terms of being a battle healer. So that it doesn't really detract at all from the healing of the group. It's still very beneficial. It is still new, so basically if you have extra XP, I would certainly level it just for kind of like the fun factor in terms of just kind of exploring new artifact, but the Clarion does hold a stand on its own merit. And then Orb Walls. Orb is very particular in terms of the situation. You don't really need Orb because Page of Destiny is a lot stronger and kind of offers the same kind of concept as Orb in terms of having like a large burst heal, where at least with Page of Destiny it's just automatic with the Page proc, where Orb you have to keep using it, and then it's not always sustainable in terms of power costs. And for tank, like I said, Clarion, I put this in here because it's something that I would consider leveling. I'm going to level it myself for fire because I think it can be beneficial for fire. I think it can be beneficial for ice. But other like tank power sets like Rage, Atomic, it's not going to be beneficial. So it's just one of those consider ones. Cersei's Mask is really just beneficial for ice. Refractor can work with a bunch of different ones. It can work with Rage, it can work with ice, it can work with fire. But it's one of those things where you can consider leveling it, but if you already have it, then you don't feed it into another artifact. But if it's at 0, then it may not be worth it leveling it from 0 to 200. But it does have some uses, plus giving some extra health to the group for like a buff troll concept. So previously in videos I've said like these artifacts aren't worth it. I'm going to change my terminology to be artifacts outside of the meta, because I always have the same comments where it's like this build I use this and it's really strong. You can make any artifact combination work. I'm looking at it from the perspective as artifacts are very expensive to level. So you don't want to be leveling something that's like a niche build or you can only use in very specific situations, because it's not worth it to you as a player. Certainly if you're a cash cow, you have tons of XP laying around, you have tons of catalysts laying around, tons of source marks to buy the catalysts, you got billions in cash to buy them off the broker, or hundreds of dollars to spend on your credit card. Sure, I mean, you could look at any of these artifacts to level, but I'm looking at it from like a general perspective, trying to be, walk the line in your shoes as well. So Computer's Distributor HUD, this does have potential, but right now hybrid DPS is just not enough of a playstyle. It really only worked with like gadgets, just because gadgets can basically has numerous might powers that it's using as well into precision. But right now precision powers just don't use enough might powers to proc that. So it's something that could be strong in the future, but right now there's just hybrid is not a strong enough of a playstyle to warrant that. Venomous Dispenser, same thing. It just kind of fell out of the meta when it was nerfed. It's still usable, but the same thing. I mean, those 6 seconds go by really quick in terms of a buff. So if you have to block, roll, whatever, you're losing so much of that extra damage, where you have like an artifact like Grim or Quizlet to be sustained damage over time. Gem of Horus was never... I mean, I know players have tried to make this work, but after the nerf on test, it just wasn't beneficial whatsoever. It's too awkward to proc it. Brawling goes beyond the 13 hits in terms of procking it, and it gets really awkward. It's just that the weapon combos presently how they are just doesn't have much synergy with it. Lamort card, I tried to work for a while. Now, the only build that like Lamort card works presently right now is for like Rage Melee and using E-Chain. So if you only want to Rage Melee, then yeah, sure, level that card. But I've tried to make it work before in terms of other builds. It's not something that is really viable, because for one, the mullet card, the proc can still miss the crit. If it misses the crit, that's huge loss. I even tried to use it in survival mode. I mean, yeah, I got like the million proc off it and stuff like that, but at the same time, you could technically use it as an art swap. The same thing, if you wipe before that 30%, 35% mark, you just lost all the damage. Like I used this during Birds of Prey, and I used this on like CT, Clock Tower Elite Final Boss with Nature. And same thing, if we wiped before the proc actually executed, I've lost all that damage. So I might as well run like Strategist card or another artifact that's going to give me more damage in terms of just hoping that we don't wipe to proc the buff at the end. So it's not viable. Bob Comlink, Grimbor's Chains. I mean, there are situations where this can work. Bob Comlink kind of works with Strategist card in terms of giving like pets power. But once again, there's not really many builds that require pet power. Grimbor's Trains can also work as like a damage perspective in terms of like a battle troll, but then at the same point you can't power yourself, so it's really running 2 trolls in the group, one to be actually giving power and one troll is like a fake DPS. So there are situations where it can work, but it just doesn't work well on bosses, just for trash mobs. At the same time, you're better off getting like a Gemini proc than you will of Grimbor's. So it's one of those things where it's worth loving. Once again, if you have like tons of money and tons of resources, then yeah, sure, you can level it just for some fun, but it's not within the meta. Same thing for rings. I mean, technically you can art swap that if you want to have the max health buff, but at the same time, that's a little overkill considering that you're swapping between like Cog and Tetra anyway. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not a fan of art swapping like 15 different artifacts as a controller. That's just excessive. So I'm not going to run that. Megahedron's being probably the most useless artifact that's ever been released, and that's never been viable for anything ever. Demon Fang, they talked about running like a Demon Fang, like the Clarion artifact, but the Demon Fang, the damage on it is just not viable. The power back is not consequential either. It's just you're better off running like something else in terms of like an artifact. You don't need Demon Fang and Clarion. Technically, you'd be like the Battle Troll combining both battle heal artifacts, but no, it's not worth it. Starheart Fragment, once again, if a healer really wants to like art swap it to be the max health buff for like the group to have the highest buff troll buff, I mean, that's possible. Once again, it's not beneficial at all for healing. It'd just be if you want to really burn resources. Lasso Truth, once again, a lot of people do that. It's kind of like a niche tank build. It is quite annoying. It breaks mechanics. Controllers can use it. So it is viable in certain situations to drag ads around, but I'm not completely a fan of how it breaks mechanics. So there's just been, I know it was like one of Batuba's favorite artifacts he released. There's just like a lot of things going on with it and a lot of unintended side effects. Lazarus Pit Water, once again, more of a gimmick. Even survival mode is a gimmick. It's just not needed. Legionnaire Sparring Eye was better in the past, but now there's really no point to go for counter immunity. There's no point of running like a battle tank in terms of that, because even with increased precision, it's not worth it. I mean, you're better off running like Clarion damage than in terms of Sparring Eye of a tank. So, I mean, that's basically it, guys. Kind of quick and dirty, kind of going through the descriptions. If we have another artifact in the future, of course, I always cover that in the video. But once again, the purpose of this is really just to show you what artifacts you should be leveling to take advantage of putting your player in the best situation they can without dumping tons of resources and dumping tons of cash. So that's really the bare bone artifacts and what you want. If you specifically want to know if it's going to be good at 200 or 160, you can always ask that in the comment section. I'll answer it. It's too much to cover just in this video. But any kind of artifact questions, you can certainly put that in the comment section below, and we can carry on that conversation there. Next video is going to be looking at Pied Piper's Flute and with Rage, and the video after that is going to be looking at the Dead King Scepter. Take care, guys. We'll see you in the next video.